Thank you for coming to my talk today. It's the last talk for the day before the closing keynote, so hopefully you still get some energy in you. I'm going to try and inflict some enthusiasm on you about print and play games. Yay. My name is Denis. I've been professionally working in the gaming industry for over 10 years. I started working as a localizer, translator, QA, playtester, cyber sports player, so all sorts of things. And over the course of the last year, I've been working on designing my own game. I'm sure all of us have always thought about designing a game or actively doing that. So a year ago was actually this conference that really inspired me, and listening to other people talk about their games, listening to other people, seeing what other people had to show to me, really inspired me. So I took this year to design a print and play game. And in the process of that, I've discovered this huge world of print and play, which I think is unknown to a lot of designers and unknown to a lot of developers. But the reason I've titled my talk as the Untapped Goldmine of print and play is because I think that there are so many gems, there are so many really cool, interesting ideas in print and play that we all can learn from as designers. So that's why I really wanted to share this with you. By the show of hands, could you let me know how many of you have heard about print and play games before you've read the title of my talk? Oh, there's a fair few hands, so that's very good. And how many of you have actually sat down to play one? Oh, same hands. Great. Excellent. Okay, so I'm working with the audience that knows a little bit about it, but I'm going to try and dive a little bit deeper and go under the skin of these games to look at the design solutions that their designers have implemented in this very constrictive medium of print and play. Well, you might remember these. When we were kids, when we were younger, teenagers, we used to play choose your own adventure books. We used to read those. Lots of playbooks and game books in which you'd have a little bit of narrative, and then you had a maze you had to go through, or you had to solve some sort of puzzle to help the characters overcome an obstacle. Or some of the books may have been interactive, where you could pull things out in those fold-out books, and you had to maybe draw something in a book or fold or tear it to pieces. And I feel that print and play games really tap into this very feeling that we all experienced, which has kind of, I think, taken a backseat when we've all grown up and become adults, and we don't really do this kind of stuff anymore. And I think print and play games really help us go back to that time and maybe tap a little bit into that feeling. And as a result, it creates a really special experience because you create a connection to this game that you're interacting with, and it can create these really unforgettable experience, and we'll touch on that in a bit. So for those of you who don't know what print and play games are, they are designed as essentially a downloadable file that you can just print out, and in the comfort of your own home, you can pour yourself a glass of wine or make a cup of tea and just sit down in your comfort zone and enjoy this game. There's a huge variety of these games. Some of them are narrative driven, so you'll be reading it like a book, and then the narrative might be being interrupted by playable segments. Some of them are very mechanically driven, like the example of the game on the left here. I can use that thing. The game on the left is called Lantern, and essentially it's bit of a glorified Yahtzee in which you roll a bunch of dice and you go through different stages trying to get to the dragon and defeat it. But what this game does, it introduces a little bit of an RPG element to the game, and suddenly you have a character, you have certain traits such as intelligence and constitution, which allow you to manipulate the rolls of your dice. So it kind of takes this game to another level and gives the player more agenda really in what they're doing. And the game on the left here is you can just download it and print it. Very straightforward, requires no assembly, just good to go off the bat. Whilst the game on the right is called Mini Rogue, and it's a slightly different example of the game that needs a little bit more setup. You have to have some dice and you have to have some tokens. You might need to prepare cards and whatnot. But in the end, you end up with this interactive dungeon that shifts every time. So you have a character, you delve into this dungeon, you fight the monsters, you find the artifacts. And this game has very clever design where the cards, that's all you have. You have these, however many, that's 7 cards that you'll be using. And they don't change, but every card scales as the level of your character does. So it's some really clever decisions by the designers to be reusing the same material and be pumping design ideas and realizing them in a very eloquent fashion. And for this game, you might need things like dice and tokens, so it's just a little bit more set up, but these games vary in range, so they can kind of cater for any person depending on their level of involvement that you're ready to put into it. So you might wonder, well, why are we even talking about print and play games? We have video games, which is an excellent medium that utilizes fancy visuals and audio and interactive medium by its nature. Then you have tabletop games, which cover the tangible aspect of it and the social aspect of it. And what I'd really like to stress, the idea that I'd really like to stress out is that print and play games is not necessarily a lesser medium or a sort of substitutory medium to tabletop games. It's a medium of its own that has some really unique ideas in it and really unique ways to utilize certain mechanics. And here's a few bullets that particularly bring print and play games to the forefront with gamers. One of them is the accessibility of these games. As you all know, there's so many games out there that we all really want to try, but you don't always have enough finances to try all of them out. Every board game you want to buy, that's $100. Every AAA title you want to buy, that's another $100. Every indie game will range around $20 and so on and so forth. Print and play games are free. Not all of them, but majority are, and they are designed with that in mind. They are designed for players to be able to engage with them regardless of where they are in the world, regardless of what their financial situation is. But at the same time, print and play games provide a really easy entry to the designers. You don't need to run a studio. You don't have any costs for hiring artists or designers or sound specialists and so on and so forth. All you need is just an idea. You need to sit down, find some time, put it into a document, flesh out the rules, come up with some interesting mechanics, interesting flavor and themes, and flesh it out and distribute it. And it bridges this gap between players and creators who struggle to enter the gaming industry. And maybe print and play games could be an outlet for your creative ideas. Maybe you have this one crazy idea that you don't quite know how to implement or try out, and maybe that is the perfect medium for you. Print and play games have a huge community, and it's a very supportive community. Print and play games stem from wargaming and from the times where people would have to show a lot of creativity in creating their own designs and their own maps and their own scenarios. And as the time has gone by and the community has grown, this sense of belonging has remained. And if you ever deal with print and play games and people who design them, the community on the forums is extremely supportive, and the people are always ready to give you feedback and help you with anything you might need, which has been, I've been participating in the competition that BGG runs, and the amount of feedback you get from other people is just crazy. It's very, very, very awesome. Print and play games offer a unique medium, which is an A4 black and white page. And it is a very constrictive medium because you don't have fancy visuals or audio, right, like some other games might do. But that is just a challenge for the designers. They find ways to overcome this challenge. They find ways to utilize this medium in their own favor and come up with ideas that squeeze every ounce of juice from that medium they work in. And as a result, print and play games is an extremely experimental and boundless genre. You'll encounter some of the craziest ideas in that medium, some of the things that you may have not even thought about, which could be extremely useful for you as a designer or developer, or in whichever capacity you are involved with games. You might find some interesting mechanics, some interesting ideas, characters, or ways to immerse the players into the game that you might have not thought about. And this is what I'd really like to tell you about today. Just to support all of my blabber with some numbers, print and play games have been popular and are rising in popularity. This graph shows the annual count of newly registered print and play games on BGG, which is probably the largest online base of games, and you can see that they have been very steadily on the rise, and we get about 400 games every year, which is a huge number for a medium like this, of which some people don't even know that it exists. And what I wanted to highlight is just a few peaks. First one around 2015, which is the golden era of board gaming. This is where some of the biggest titles have been coming out, titles like Scythe, and I did my research and I had some others that I can't remember now, but there's been a lot of games that have really kind of regained a lot of traction with players. And then there's another huge peak in 2020. Any ideas what that could have been? the pandemic, right? Not only the pandemic had removed the ability for people to socialize and see their friends, but it also forced people to stay indoors, which for a lot of people was, of course, a big challenge. But some other people have found the time to actually realize their creative ideas and go, do you know what, I'm going to try and do that game that I've always wanted to make. And so we had a huge spike, and now that we're kind of back in a social setting, it's on the dropping a little bit, but it's still going strong. And if we look at Google Trends, they support exactly the same. If we just look for print and play searches, same peaks, and as you can see there, on the rise, reaching nearly 70% of its peak demand. All right, hopefully I've excited you a little bit about it. You excited your taste buds. So let's actually look at some solid examples of print and play games. What I'd really like to suggest for you to do is to write down some of these titles or download this presentation later, and the titles of the games are under the photos that I'll be showcasing. I'd really suggest for you to find these games and actually play them. One thing is watching a video about it or listening to me talk about it, and a completely different thing is actually sitting down and finding that immersion and discovering it and discovering the ways that this game manages to immerse you into what it's trying to do. The way I'd like to present these is I'll first off showcase a few games that that manage to find a way to utilize their medium really well, and they do something exceedingly well at that. And then we'll look at some just general good game design tropes and some interesting concepts that these games bring through shining in a particular aspect of good game design, which is something we all strive to do. First one I've got on the list is Utopia Engine, which is a role-playing adventure game in which you are a sole savior of the world. The doom is upon us, and you are trying to collect parts of the special doomsday machine that can prevent the doomsday. All this game is 2 pages. This is essentially the front and the back of the same A4 page. And what this game achieves is simplicity and elegance in the design that it does. On this side of the map, I didn't mean to do that. These buttons are very close to each other. Let me try that again. This page achieves to create this kind of omni view, right? As almost aerial view of the land that you might experience in playing a game like Witcher or some other role-playing game, or Metro, where you have this huge world and a huge map that you need to be exploring. But then very cleverly, this game stitches in all the puzzles you need to be solving on the same map. And as the player, you'll be visiting these different locations and trying to solve these puzzles in search of different artifacts or components. You might encounter monsters and events. This page is a little bit cropped, but you've got events, and there's a monster table. Oh my god, this is going to keep happening, is it? There's a monster table on the side. So the game just puts in a lot of flavor and a lot of adventure into just one page. It's very much a dice-driven game, so there's obviously an element of randomness to it, but there's a lot of agenda in the player's hand and a lot of decisions that you'll be driving as the player as you collect these parts, and then you head out to your workshop, which is the other side of the page, where you try and fuse these parts of the machine together. And it delivers this really nail-biting experience at times where the game is so close, down to the wire, you're trying to assemble your final parts, and it suddenly you forget that you're just writing numbers on a page. You're just in a completely different universe, and you're doing something extremely exciting. So that's Utopia Engine for you. Great game. Immersion. Immersion is what we all, as game developers, this is probably one of the pillars, one of the cornerstones of game design. This is what we're all trying to do. We're trying to create special worlds for our players. And the Bargain Basement Bathysphere is one of the most, I shouldn't say most popular games, but this is a game that's been spoken widely in the tabletop community about, just because it's just done so well at creating this sensation of immersion. This is how it does it. Both of these screenshots are parts of the same page. In the game, you are piloting a bathysphere. And as the title suggests, it's a bargain basement bathysphere, so it's not very good. You're trying to take it down to the bottom of the ocean, and you've got this whole kind of route you follow, and you're trying to get Sorry about that. I'm really trying to stay far away from it. Maybe I should use this thing less. You're trying to get to the bottom of the ocean where you can collect fish and collect points. And what this game does is it provides a lot of information for you on the same page. You've got your levels of stress, your levels of damage, your oxygen, the people you need to be saving, the discoveries that you've made, which puts a lot of agenda in your hands as the player. Because the idea of the game is not only go all the way down to the bottom, but also make it all the way back up before your bathysphere explodes. Which means that every turn you'll be making meaningful decisions and deciding, do I go deeper? Do I stop? Oh, but I really want that fish because that's going to give me so many extra points. But am I going to have enough oxygen? And so on and so forth. So you have these kind of decisions. And as I mentioned earlier with the previous game, you just forget that you are just writing down numbers on the page. It creates this incredible sense of immersion. It really makes you feel like you are a pilot in the cockpit with a bunch of sensors and kind of readers that you need to keep track of. So does it excellently well. Tangibility is an aspect that tabletop games have an upper hand against video games, and print and play games take tangibility to a completely different level, because your standard tabletop games, your regular games, will offer components that you can feel. If you attended a previous talk about tabletop games, Paul spoke a lot about these components looking yummy, things you really want to touch, you really want to feel them. Print and play games take it to another level by going, well, what if you could write on the components? What if you could cut them or tear them or do whatever you like to them? The game doesn't cost you anything, so you might as well. And so the games take it to a completely different level, and the example of the super skill pinball game here is you've got a little ball that you move around, and it essentially simulates a pinball game with a bunch of dice and markers. And you've got a big table that you move this ball around and you mark the things off and you score your points and you can shake the table, and it just allows you to interact with the page that is in front of you so much, which creates this very special connection between you and the game. So these are some of the things that print and play games do extremely well in their medium. But also, as I mentioned earlier, they can actually teach us a lot in general about game design and about good game design principles, really. So this is just a set of bullets, and we'll go through these one by one, but if you download the slides later, you can use that as a reference. Setting clear goals. If you are familiar with game design principles, setting clear, intermediate, and clear overarching goals for the player is extremely important. Otherwise, your players are going to feel really lost. They're not going to know what they're doing. And print and play games achieve that excellently because everything is literally in front of you on the page. There's nowhere else for it to be. And an example of the game that I think does that really well is the game called The Cleaner. It's a very, very kooky game, but it's very cool. In this game, you are cleaning up a murder scene. So you've got all these different rooms in which you might see there's the victim, and there's the signs of struggle, if there's a broken wine glass or there's blood stains. And you need to clean it all up before the police arrives. You have the timer, so you're very constricted in what you need to be doing, which creates a lot of tension and a lot of this, oh my God, I need to take priorities over what I'm doing. And this game sets these objectives very clearly right in front of you. Here's all the rooms you need to clean. Here is your timer. The world is your oyster. Go for it. The game creates a lot of tension in you trying to achieve these goals because there's a deck of cards, and there's certain randomness and variation that happens as you try and achieve these goals, which might mean that you might not necessarily do everything you want to do. And then the police arrives, but it doesn't mean you've lost the game. There's a chance that you might still win, and there's a chance that they might not notice these little bits that you didn't manage to clean up. So it's a very fun game. Definitely look into it. It's great. And what this game does as well, it's got a lot of potential for ludonarrative, and ludonarrative is emerging narrative. It's this term that lots of designers use. Ludonarrative is when the game tells a story, not because the story is written in the game like a narrative or dialogue, but because of something that happens in the game, inadvertently telling the story. And you will talk for days about how that bloody stain just would not come off, and the police are on the doorstep, and your final efforts, you're trying to take it out, and then they didn't notice it anyway, and you were just fine. And it creates these really memorable stories that you just want to share with other people. And that's what I really like about these games. So that's the cleaner for you. Very, very fun. Print and play games, just like video games and tabletop games, but in a different way, create pocket universes, which again, as game design, is something we try to achieve. We try and create worlds to which the player can escape, to forget about their real life, about their worries, and get really immersed into what they're doing. And print and play games do it in their own way, but I find in a very effective way, which I'd like to demonstrate on the example of this game, which is called Your Name Here and the Argonauts. Now, before we dive into that, from the get-go, before you even start the game, you fill in your name on the box. You already create a connection between the player and the game. It's yours already. It feels like you've left a mark on it. The idea behind the game is you've got a team of Argonauts that you are managing there, and you encounter various events that represent monsters or events or artifacts from the Odyssey and Greek mythology and the Iliad. And as you go through this adventure, essentially it's just a deck of cards that sits in your pocket, but it hides this world in it that keeps evolving as you play the game. Every time you finish a playthrough, you might be leveling up some of the monsters. You might be bringing in new monsters or permanently removing some of the old ones. You'll see these monsters have like these little checkboxes and little sort of, their power scales up as time goes by. And the effect that this achieves is that over time you have this unique deck of adventures that is essentially a record of the adventures you've gone on to. It's nobody else's adventure, it's yours. And it creates a very special connection between you and this game that is very difficult to explain to other people, to go, oh my God, it's so cool. But it just has so much special meaning to you as the player because of the time that you've put into it and the effort that you've put into it. And it, in a way, it'll remind you of your victories or your losses as well. So it's just kind of this. If you're familiar with the concept of legacy in tabletop, this game does something very similar as it kind of evolves as you go, and it just lives in your pocket. And that's exactly why I called it a pocket universe, because it's just this little tiny space that just completely teleports you to this other universe to go on adventures. Print and play games do a lot with very little. This is mostly due to restrictions of their medium, as we talked about. You as a designer really need to find ways to squeeze every ounce of juice from every millimeter on your card. But at the same time, you have to strike a balance with not overloading the player. You can jam in a lot of information, but then you can easily deter people if they go, oh, this just looks really messy. And one of the games that does that the best, and if you were to go away from this talk and maybe only play a couple of games, make sure that Spellopolis is one of those games. That's the game on the right. It is available in retail, but it started off as a print and play game, and all of the components are available as print and play. And this game does absolute magic with just 18 cards. It's all it is. It's 18 cards that on one side represent different city blocks. You've got parks and commercial regions and roads and so on. And the other side of the card represents goals that you need to be striving towards. Maybe you need to build a large circular road to score a bunch of points. Or maybe you need to make sure that your parks are on the edges of the city, or your commercial regions are far away from your living quarters, and so on. And the replayability in this game is just insane, because the way you play it is you take out 3 cards that will represent the goals for this round, and then you play constructing the city, which again really achieves this immersion of the city builder and city planner. You're really thinking about every turn, where am I going to place the next card? Is it going to move me closer towards one of my objectives but further away from another objective, and how do I balance it best? And this is exactly what it does, but with this limitless number of combinations of these 3 goals, and the different way that the cards come out every time you play, it creates this huge amount of replayability. And then they've taken it another step further, and they've created another game called Agropolis, which does the same thing but in a rural setting with chickens and cows. And then they did a Combopolis, which combines the two, and it just takes it completely to another level. And out of all the games that I'm talking about, Spellopolis is the game that's the highest on BGG, and I think their rank was around 350, 400. If you think about it, that's out of all games there has ever been designed that's been registered on BGG, of which there are tens of thousands. This game is number 400. Just for a print-to-play game, that's a crazy huge achievement. And another example of a game that does something very similar is the Palm Island. Yeah, Palm Island, that's the name of it. It utilizes the cards very cleverly as well. And on these cards, it's essentially a game about collecting resources and building your little, you're on this island and you're building a little village and gathering various resources. And so every card is split into two sides, and then on the back as well, so you kind of have 4 different states for each card, and they all begin in their very basic, simple state, and as you play through the deck of cards, you'll be upgrading cards by rotating them, flipping them around, so as you're playing through the same deck of cards, it kind of evolves in front of your eyes, and then up until the point where you sort of tally up your score. But it's just, again, really clever use of space where there's just one card. There's 4 different states to it, and then there's different states where you can tuck the cards to use them as resources. So it feels very organic and very clever in the way it's all been done. And again, just does so much with so little. Right. Experimental design. That was one of the things I mentioned early on. And I really believe that print-and-play games, because they allow anyone to become a game designer, they have some of the craziest ideas out there. And I highly recommend, if you're working on a game that relies on mechanics or obviously theme, go and hunt for some print-and-play games. See what's already out there. You might get those ideas that might be super valuable for your project. For example, did you ever wonder what one-dimensional chess might look like? There's an answer for that online. You might go, well, why would I care about that? You may have heard there's been a recent release on Steam called Ponbarian, which is a roguelike, a game that utilizes chess movement pieces for enemies. So if you're working on a game that utilized chess mechanics in some way, this game might give you some really cool ideas about that. Tempus Imperium, the game on the left there, uses real time as an input. That's a really interesting idea. There's a grid that represents villages and houses and barricades, and it uses the date and the hour and the minute as an input to decide where these objects get placed on the grid, which is a bit of a random generator, sure, but then it's still an interesting idea to go, well, what if I take real time as a concept, right, that I can play with and build something around it. And Black Sonata is another example of a very kind of experimental design. I'd never heard about anything like this before. Black Sonata does hidden movement game, but it's a solo play. So you play against a deck of cards, and there is this lady that you're trying to chase and predict where she's gone, and then you have to guess who she is. And there's a very clever system. I'm not going to go into too much detail about it, but have a look online. There's a really cool system, the way they've done it. There's these punch cards that kind of give you clues about the movement of the character. And it's just crazy. And this game has been published in the physical edition, so you can get that as well. Excuse me. And that does happen to a fair few print-to-play games. The ones that get noticed, the ones that become really kind of successful, some of them go and actually get manufactured in a physical form. And if you are working in the format of tabletop, that could be a perfect avenue for you to take and publish this game as print-and-play for free first, and then if it gets successful and noticed, you can then take it another step forward and actually print the game. Print-and-play games allow you to leave your mark on the world, which is another cornerstone of good game design. Allow your player to feel like they are really interacting with the world, like something they're doing leaves a mark, makes a difference. And print-and-play games do it quite literally because it's a page you draw on. And on the left, we've got the D100 Dungeon, which is a game where you explore this ever-growing dungeon. You've got a big kind of manual reference that you use, and as you explore it, you draw these sections of the dungeon. And by the time you're done and you step away from it, you can look back at it and reminisce about this unique adventure you went on. Nobody else in the world has probably gone into the same dungeon because the permutations are just crazy, the number of permutations. And it creates this memorable experience, and it gives you ownership of that experience to go, that was my adventure. I did that. But it also allows you to tap into your creative side. And these games I'm talking about, all of them are designed as solo games. So you get to enjoy them in the company of only yourself. And if you perhaps don't feel confident in your drawing skills, well, maybe this is an opportunity to try it out and just do it the best you can. And this is something I found. I'm not a very good drawer, but playing games like this really allows me gives me this creative outlet, which in a way kind of maybe sparks my other creative neurons. So yeah, highly recommend that. And 1572 Lost Expedition is another game in which you essentially go on a voyage, on an expedition, and you encounter all sorts of different terrain and events as you go, and you trace your route, and you, just like this player has done here, can document and record some things you encounter, again, just to look back at it and go, this is like a journal entry of your adventure. It's as if you'd really gone on this voyage, and now there's a record of it in front of you. Print-and-play games give you the ownership of the experience that you have. And here's the two games that I think do that quite well. The game on the left is called Deep Space D6, and this is a physical edition as well. That's one of those games that's actually been boxed. In this game, you manage a crew of people on a spaceship, and you are essentially, as the captain, as your spaceship goes on various adventures, you'll encounter perils and some sort of events and enemies that you have to deal with. And you as the captain get to make decisions about how you utilize your dice and what jobs you give them, and whether you risk certain things or not, or whether you decide to deal with certain threats immediately and others you might decide to do later. And it puts a lot of decision making and a lot of ownership of the outcome of this adventure into your hands, because if it's gone very poorly, well, you got no one else to blame other than yourself, because you've made all those decisions. I mean, sure, there are dice, so sometimes there is a little bit of that, and we know that some people and dice just don't get along very well. But it suddenly, what this game does, it breaks this. It creates a special connection and breaks this illusion that these are just dice. Suddenly you do view them as little people that you manage, and you suddenly care about them. And if one of them is in the hospital, and you kind of can't wait for them to really get back to the job in a very weird managerial way, but you kind of care about them as well. And it just creates, again, this really special connection between you. And the game on the right, this is actually a snapshot from the game I've been working on. That's the game called Alchemist's Apprentice. In this game, you get to create potions. So you learn about alchemy from this grumpy old loon, and you use dice to assign them to a potion formula, essentially following certain requirements. And there are thousands of different ways to solve these little puzzles. And I want to stress that this game is a puzzle solver, because after you've rolled your dice, when you start utilizing them, there are various placement effects that allow you to affect other dice. So this is a puzzle solving game, because you need to really figure out a way to utilize all of your dice and assign them to this formula. And once you've achieved a solution and you step away from it, again, it feels like it's yours. You are the one who's made that solution, because maybe nobody else has come up with a really clever way to exchange these two values and do something really crazy about that. And it makes you feel really cool, makes you feel like you've done something exciting. And the last thing I'll talk about is the mindfulness of the experience that print and play games create. And it's a very special thing that I'd really like to stress, because I feel that print and play games really allow you to kind of transport to this safe space in which you can just do your own thing and kind of really enjoy and connect with what you're doing. There's a whole kind of subgenre, and I'm not sure if I can bunch them into print and play games as well, but there is a genre of solo RPG games, and a lot of them are accessible as just print and play. And the Sealed Library is an example of a solo journaling game in which you are the librarian trying to preserve the knowledge of the humanity in this library that's been attacked by some unknown invaders that create this threat. And you play with a deck of cards that gives you prompts about different things that happen every day. And then you have a Jenga, which represents the barricade. So at the end of every day, you have to pull pieces from the Jenga to see if your barricade withstands or not. Which adds this crazy tension to the game, because you're like, oh man, I'm so close to solving this, finding the solution on how to save these books, and then you have to pull from the Jenga. And some of the cards make you do that as well, and it makes you really hate the deck of the cards. But the core of the game is journaling, is the game encourages you to write down entries. Well, what happened today? And the cards will give you prompts. They'll say, hey, you were wandering down the halls of the library and you found this book that talks about this maybe art that you've always really wanted to learn about, or this particular sport or something else. And then it asks you, what is it? And it puts agenda into your hand. Write down about it. What was it? How did you find learning about it? Which could spark you to explore certain experiences and feel certain things sort of outside the game, right? So it expands that, which is really cool. And again, you can play this game in one sitting, or you can do sort of one day at a time, and you can have it as your little personal journaling experience. And again, it creates this really special connection to you and that game. Or another example is a game called Supermarché, in which you are managing a supermarket, and it is not as stressful as it sounds, because you get to cut out little pieces and find the tokens that represent your food, and you get to put it all on shelves, and you get to put stickers and what goes on sale today and what doesn't. And you have customers coming in and they want all sorts of things, and you're trying to go, oh, you really want some milk, but we have nothing. But we have a sale on the oranges. Do you want to grab that? And you have all these deliveries, and it's just fun. It just puts you into this little zone where you're just moving things around, and it just feels really good. So yeah, very, very special. So maybe print and play games could become your creative outlet. Maybe you have some interesting ideas that you can't quite get off the ground for whatever reason, and maybe that is a way for you to try it out. And as I've said, there is a huge, incredibly supportive community. Reach out, post your game on BGG, post your ideas on BGG. You'll get a lot of really useful feedback, really useful critique. And when your game is ready, you'll have a lot of players who will happily play it because they love the hobby. And they're more than happy to do that for you. Or maybe you can use print and play games as a well of inspiration for your own games. Maybe you can find ideas that are thematic or mechanical in whatever way that you like. Or maybe they're just a mindful escape for you, just to sit down and do something in the evening, take your eyes off the screen and do some journaling, do some library exploration. We're a little bit ahead of the schedule, which is probably a good thing because I tend to run over when I rehearse that. So I've got some time for questions if we have any. Question at the back. I think we've got a mic coming. Just there.
For the people living on the YouTube.
Being that there's such a huge amount of people getting into it and producing massive amounts of content, do you think if someone like me were to step foot into it that I might accidentally end up on someone's toes if I've sort of accidentally recreated previously existing work?
I don't get that vibe from the community. As I say, I feel that people are very supportive and gentle about that, and perhaps do your research just to make sure that it doesn't happen, that you know exactly something like that already exists. Do some research, but what you can do is just post an idea to say, hey, this is what I'm thinking about. What do you think? Maybe there are games you could suggest that are similar, or maybe I could take it to another level. And what you can do is you can invest a little bit of time and maybe create just a very initial prototype and go, hey, here is some pieces of paper that I've cut out and tried out. What do you think about that? And then you might have people who might say, oh, this feels really similar to that other game. But I don't think in any way it'll be accusatory to go, hey, you're plagiarizing stuff, but more like there's this other game and your game might be different enough from it. But then I think their point would be for you to see that something is already out there that you can draw from. And I think the community understands really well, like we do in game design, that we all stand on the shoulders of those who'd come before us, and coming up with something extremely creative that's never been done before is a bit of a unicorn, whilst in reality we're all building on already existing ideas. So I think you should totally give it a go, and as I say, reach out to the community and just ask the question, and there's a big community on Reddit and on BGG, and they'll be very happy to help.
Oh, that's really good to hear. Thank you.
Any other questions? We have some more time.
So you mentioned that these are all kind of like solo games, but is there like a scene for like multiplayer games? Maybe getting a group of friends over and playing a game that you've never played before for the first time?
Yep, definitely. I think I kind of stressed the solo aspect of it just because the game I was designing happened to be solo. So coincidentally, a lot of the games I've been discovering have been solo as well. But there's definitely a lot of multiplayer, particularly when it comes to role playing. There are so many games out there that you can get for completely free or really cheap. That are role play, which involves others, and also games like, for example, Spirlopolis, the game I was talking about with the city building. You can do it by yourself, but you can also as successfully play with others, and it plays just as fine with 2, 3, 4 players. So a lot of those games, not a lot, but some of those games will support multiplayer as well. Some of them may have been designed as solo in the first place. And if you like, after the talk, I can let you know maybe some of those games. I can help you find those. But there's definitely a big scene. It's what you can do as well on BGG. You can do an advanced search for games. So you can search for print and play games, but you can also add a multiplayer filter. So it'll give you a whole bunch of games that you can then perhaps sort by rating. So you can maybe step into it, exploring the games that have already been rated by the community, and then as you delve deeper and deeper into it, you can allow yourself to go into the depths of it where there is some more unexplored stuff. Cool. Any other questions?
Does that website have an associated like Discord, or is it the best way to sort of make contact with the community? Or
I'm not sure. There must be Discord communities. I've just not encountered them, but their group on Facebook is hugely active. So is Reddit, and BGG forums is probably Board Game Geek forums is probably the best place to go. Cool. Anyone else?
Hi. Can you tell a little bit about how people can expect to make money on this media?
Yep. So some of the print and play games are distributed through itch, and they have a cost stitched into them. So there's a multiplayer game as well that I just thought about. It's called Rats High Tea at Sea, which is a bit of a weird name. It's a cool multiplayer game in which you're all rats trying to escape from a ship, and you're trying to steal away as much food and little trinkets as you can. So that game was developed by Shut Up and Sit Down, which is, if you've heard about them, they're a very big reviewer in the board gaming industry. So they've developed that game. So it's available on itch, and that has a pay up front. So I can't remember what it is, but it costs maybe $10 or so. And I think the popularity of the genre growing, you'll probably get quite a bit of revenue out of it. But quite a few games, I think, are designed with the intention to go physical once they've been explored by the community, because then you can easier pitch it to the publisher to say, hey, take the Bargain Basement Bathysphere that I showed to you. It was first published maybe 5 years ago or so, and it was, I don't think, maybe my guess would be the designer at the time didn't really want to monetize it. He just did what he thought was fun to do. But actually this year they're going to be publishing a physical version, because there is a contract that's been, they've released some new art and new details about that. So I guess some of it is incidental, some of it might be intentional. You might be wanting to do that. I think for a lot of players, print and play is a hobby foremost. So making money on it is probably a bit of a complementary thing to it. I think it's the sense of let's get together and do something really cool and something really awesome. And I think for you as a designer, this can give you a credential, and probably in my case with designing Alchemist's Apprentice, for me, I've never designed a game before. I've been in the gaming industry for a really long time, but this is my first design. So this was a way for me to say, hey, here's something I made, and if people think it's cool, then I can take it as a credential to go, hey, I'm the guy who made that thing, so maybe I can work with you on this next idea or next IP. So cool. Anyone else? It's a good thing I ran under time, isn't it?
Thank you for the talk. I know you talk about print and play on paper, but do you see print like 3D print as a natural course for this developing?
That's a good question, actually. I haven't thought about it. 3D printing and models in the tabletop industry is a bit of a divisive subject. People really like miniatures, but people also really like well-designed games. And I think there's been quite a few trends recently where there's these new board games that come out that are loaded with plastic, and they have so many miniatures, which are really cool, but then suddenly the cost of the game is crazy. And in quite a few cases, unfortunately, in my experience, those games are a mile wide but an inch deep. They're just not exciting, and they really try and roll on the fact that they have these really cool miniatures, or look at us, we made this really cool thing. And of course, it's not necessarily a rule. There are games that are incredible and the miniatures really complement that experience. So I think from my experience, the print and play in particular, and sort of the real hardcore hobbyists, unless you talk about wargamers for whom miniatures is a essential of the hobby, right? Because those miniatures aren't just an additional accessory to the game, but they are the core of the game. Majority of the modern board games, and them miniatures are just an accessory. They don't need to be there. You could usually use tokens or little standees, like Gloomhaven does, for example, right? They're just cardboard standees. You could just easily get away with that. And I think it's probably a really interesting avenue, but I'm not sure. I don't think print and play games have explored that avenue, not that I've encountered. And I think part of it is because when you start introducing 3D miniatures and your costs start going up, you actually need to get them somewhere. Whether you distribute those miniature files for free so that people could make them, they still need to have access to a printing facility or have their own 3D printer. Whilst I think a really kind of cornerstone for print and play is accessibility, and I think, in my opinion, 3D miniatures might kind of interrupt that bridge. So, but I think it's a really interesting idea and maybe worth exploring. Not something I've encountered. Cool. Anyone else? Oh, yep.
So I don't know if you've encountered like production, as in commercial printing of games, but I found when I try and look for options, it's very hard to find who can do that service. Do you have any advice, or do you know where to find those services?
You mean for manufacture of like a full-scale board game?
Yeah, I would say yes.
Yep. So there is, I'm probably not the expert on the subject. I know of some manufacturers, and you've probably heard the Panda it's a name that gets thrown around a lot. It's a big manufacturer in China. I think a lot of manufacturers these days go to China because it's a lot cheaper to make the games there, and then they ship them out from there. So majority of the Kickstarters are made. I think all of them are pretty much made in China. You'd be better get in touch with some published people. So we've got the people who have given previous talks. Sorry, I forgot the name of the company. It was Paul was the name of the gentleman. Arcus Games, that's right. Maybe find them in the hallway and have a chat with them. They might have a much better idea. Cool. Cool. Thank you.